The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Father Cyril, and I will just begin with a kind of parsing of the title of my paper a bit. Does the long-contested question of Orthodox Ecumenism remain open after Crete? So beginning with long-contested questions. So the first bit of my paper, what undergirds it is the question, how long can a divisive and theologically significant question in the church go on fruitfully being unanswered? Okay, I'll say that again. How long can a divisive and theologically significant question in the church go on fruitfully being unanswered? So the premise is that there's been a long contested question, it's of theological significance, and it's remained unanswered. How long can that go on? And it's the question of ecumenism, but I'll return to that as the first part. The next part actually is the end, Crete. And the second part of my paper is just what did Crete say about ecumenism, with particular reference to the document Relations of the Orthodox Church with the Rest of the Christian World. And then the remain open piece really depends on what is Crete, or what was Crete, or what will Crete have been. What is the status of Crete? What authority does it have in what it said about ecumenism, in light particularly of the fact that 4 of the 14 universally recognized autocephalous churches were not in attendance. So beginning with then the question of what the question is. What is the question of ecumenism? I think we know, certainly any observer of orthodoxy of the last quarter century and more, knows that there's been an intensifying conflict theologically within the church between ecumenists and anti-ecumenists, or supporters of ecumenical activity and opponents of it. I think, though, that it's actually harder to pinpoint than it may first appear precisely what the theological difference is. From the anti-ecumenical side, it's often suggested that ecumenists are relativists, but few, if any, Orthodox engaged in ecumenism believe that all Christian traditions are on a par, or that theological differences have not mattered. So relativism versus an understanding that there is truth does not seem to be the difference. Ecumenists or their supporters often suppose or say that Orthodox anti-ecumenists believe there can be no salvation except within the Orthodox Church. But if one reads anti-ecumenist writing very closely, they tend not to make that presumption, and they stop short of it and say, well, actually God can save whomever he wishes in ways known to God. So what precisely is the difference? I'm not going to argue this out, but just lay it out, and I've tried to argue this at a little more length elsewhere. But I think that we might say, and this is based on reading of a number of anti-ecumenical authors, that really the difference boils down to this. When formal separation occurs between previously united portions of the single apostolic church, must one of those portions begin at once to undergo a decline of grace, which can only continue as long as the separation lasts? So this actually, I think, is the nub of the issue. At least in my reading, anti-ecumenists believe that once there has been a separation, that the separated portion, which is always up for debate, but the separated portion can only undergo a loss of grace that increases over time and that cannot be turned around so long as that separated portion remains formally separated. Whereas, again, in my reading, Orthodox ecumenists leave open the possibility that a separated communion can have a fresh infusion of grace coming from the Spirit of God, whether at work internally upon members of that communion in their rediscovery of resources proper to the depths of their own tradition, or and actually it would be probably in some combination perhaps, also enabled by contact and dialogue with the Orthodox Church or other churches of apostolic foundation. It's this idea that there are ecclesial gifts of various kinds and in differing measures, waxing or waning, as the case may be, to be found outside the Orthodox Church. These gifts, from the ecumenical Orthodox point of view, Orthodoxy seeks to affirm and be even potentially instructed by wherever they are to be found, even as it also seeks to be honest about deficiencies where the latter exist. Orthodox ecumenism is committed to taking seriously, not meaninglessly affirming in an indiscriminate way, but taking seriously the Christian faith, not only of non-Orthodox individuals, but of non-Orthodox communities of faith. In this sense, it is open and empirical, but not without sound criteria for judgment. So now moving to the next section on what Crete said about ecumenism. Within the document, Relations of the Orthodox Church with the Rest of the Christian World, perhaps the most discussed passage, both among the bishops gathered at Crete and also in the post-conciliar responses, is the one found in paragraph 6, where the very question we've been describing arises, namely how to evaluate non-Orthodox Christian bodies. And here, if we could have the quote from paragraph 6. So we'll start with, this key sentence. Actually, there are two sentences here. First, in accordance with the ontological nature of the church, her unity can never be perturbed. And then the sentence that has, I guess it's somewhat equivalent to the subsistent sentence of Lumen Gentium 8 at Vatican II, but where does it start? In spite of this, the Orthodox Church accepts the historical name of other non-Orthodox Christian churches and confessions that are not in communion with her. And then it goes on in what is much less discussed, but we will return to, and believes that her relations with them should be based on the most speedy and objective clarification possible of the whole ecclesiological question, and most especially of their general teachings on sacraments, grace, priesthood, and apostolic succession. There have generally been two interpretive approaches to this passage. One has been a bit, we might call it maximalist, and the other minimalist. The maximalist interpretation says that if we accept the historical name of other non-Orthodox Christian churches and confessions, then because Orthodoxy is not nominalist, we are also accepting the reality to which the name refers. So this has been argued by an arch anti-ecumenist, and I think it's been hoped for by ecumenically minded Orthodox. But anyway, in that maximalist interpretation, to accept the name is to accept the reality on some level of non-Orthodox Christian churches. And of course, as anyone who's followed the debate around this knows, it's the inclusion of the word churches that was the real sticking point and that led, for example, Metropolitan Hierotheos Vlachos of Naupactus, thank you, not to sign the document. Okay, so that was the final form of the text. Now, the minimalist interpretation looks much more at the pre-conciliar draft version and the kind of backpedaling that seems to have occurred from the pre-conciliar version to the final version. So in the pre-conciliar text, the kind of especially relevant portion reads, the Orthodox Church acknowledges the historical existence of other Christian churches and confessions. So in the draft, it was stronger. So the minimalist argument goes. And then in the final text, it got brought down to merely the name, which is more ambiguous. And if you follow further back, it's kind of interesting. If we can just scroll up a little bit. It keeps getting stronger the farther back in time you go, and weaker as we get closer to Crete. So before historical existence, it had been actual existence, which is a little stronger. And before that, it had actually been ontological existence. let's see, scroll down some more. I think that's it. But then to look the other way to see how Crete's final form was not merely a backpedaling. We might notice the amended version unanimously approved by the Holy Synod of the Church of Greece just prior to the Council of Crete. So that penultimate version that we saw second a moment ago, and we won't scroll back there to confuse us, but the one that said, what did it say? Let's scroll back. Where are we? Historical, yeah. The Orthodox Church acknowledges the historical existence. So the Holy Synod of the Church of Greece did not accept that. And in their meeting just prior to Crete, they would recognizes the historical existence of other Christian confessions and communities. Who notices what word has been removed? Yes. Okay. So they were okay with that, and even Metropolitan Vlachos, Hierotheos Vlachos signed that. But then it was changed further to what we saw at the top, accepts the historical name. Okay. Now, we'll look at paragraph 21 in a moment. During the council itself, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and Metropolitan Zazoulis, together with others, were committed to keeping the word churches in the text, and so we have the version that we have received. I think that if we look at the council document as a whole, and even other documents at the council, it's very hard to see the council as not affirming ecumenism. However, there are some ambiguities. So one of them, if we now can look at paragraph 21, maybe one of the most pronounced ambiguities, thank you, is there's a paragraph that strongly supports faith and order. It says that its theological documents are viewed positively. But then closes that paragraph with the portion that is bold-faced. Nonetheless, the Orthodox Church maintains reservations concerning paramount issues of faith and order because the non-Orthodox churches and confessions have diverged from the true faith of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, that's a strong statement, which had not been made on a conciliar level previously. That the non-Orthodox churches and confessions have diverged from the true faith. It seems it's assumed in Orthodoxy that, of course, all Orthodox believe that all the other churches have diverged, but this has actually not been stated in a pan-Orthodox council on this level, to my knowledge, at least. The Greek is provided there, and somebody better at Greek than I am might help me with this question. I think that my hopeful interpretation wouldn't fly, but I put it there just to see if possibly it would, which is because emi orthodoxi ecclesiae ke homologiae, okay, could it be because the not Orthodox churches and communities have diverged? In other words, could it be a tautology? Those churches that are not Orthodox have diverged. Or must it be interpreted, as I fear it must, be interpreted that any church that is not the canonical Orthodox Church has actually diverged? Anybody want to? Well, I guess we'll leave that for the question and answer. But that's a question that I have. I think it can only be interpreted probably in the way I would rather it not be. But however, even so, there's still a great deal of tension within the text, because if we go back to the key sentence of paragraph 6, which I've reproduced here, the second part of that sentence is quite interesting and important, and I don't think it's been commented on as much because the question of including or not including the word churches has garnered all the attention. But the rest of that sentence reads that the Orthodox Church believes that her relations with them, the other non-Orthodox churches, which is translated, actually it says heterodox in Greek, and then it's more softly translated non-Orthodox in English, believes that our relations with them should be based on the most speedy and objective clarification possible. Now that seems very important. It suggests not everything is already clarified, and the exact relationship stands to be clarified. Of the whole ecclesiological question, and most especially of their more general teachings on sacraments, grace, priesthood, and apostolic succession, suggesting, as was the case in other periods of church history, when there were differences in even ecumenical councils, which some were supportive of and others not, there continued to be discussion and an effort to come to understand more deeply, what does the other actually think? Do we think what we think they thought, or might they think something else? And this seems to leave open the question that we still need to engage the other in order to discern more fully what it is that they actually teach and believe, and whether that might be consistent with our faith more than we had realized. So I'm leaving that as just this tension in the text. I'll in this section, and I think I have about 5 more minutes before we'll get to the Q&A, but I'll end this section by just noting that if you read people, I'm really struck often. It is assumed in a number of writers that Crete robustly affirms ecumenism. And in spite of the ambiguities that have been mentioned here. So, for example, I'll just read a couple, if I can. Yeah. For the first time in its history, writes Archbishop Job of Telmessos, the Orthodox Church has taken a conciliar decision with regard to participation in the ecumenical movement and engagement in theological dialogue with other Christian churches and confessions. And from everything else he reads, you see that it's a positive decision. Antoine Arjakovsky has expressed a similar point, perhaps even more forcefully, in speaking of the crucial importance of, quote, the recognition by the fathers of the council that the borders of the Church of Christ extend beyond those of the Orthodox Church, and that therefore the ecumenical movement is legitimate. Both of these are in the maximalist interpretive camp, right, of that key sentence. Now, from a quite different standpoint, Father Peter Heers, who's aligned with Metropolitan Hierotheos in terms of his anti-ecumenical view of the council and of much else, has observed in a similar way, quote, the Council of Crete is the only council of bishops, by which he means Orthodox bishops, perhaps because there are not other bishops, but the Council of Crete is the only council of bishops ever to recognize, promote, praise, and accept ecumenism. So from Archbishop Job to Father Heers, there's consensus that this has been a major historical statement in support of ecumenism. Now, Dagmar Heller, who's looking at me right now, has taken another approach to say that in advance of the meeting, there had been, I'm quoting, a discussion in some Orthodox churches, such as the Church of Cyprus and the Bulgarian Church, as to whether the non-Orthodox churches may be called churches. The final wording is obviously a compromise that enabled the text to be agreed. It leaves open whether these other communities can be recognized as churches, and instead simply acknowledges that they describe themselves as churches, okay? Although, interestingly, this morning, or afternoon, whenever Dagmar gave her talk, she said something else, which I wrote down, and I will now read. I don't know if that's allowed, but she said, oh Lord, where is it? Anyway, she said, what's that? I found it, okay. The commitment to ecumenical dialogue from the side of the Orthodox Church is very clearly expressed. So even though there's a concern about the ambiguity, there's still this impression that Crete said something somehow decisively important in favor of ecumenism in spite of the ambiguities. If that is so, and we might discuss whether it is, but if that is so, then we can move to the third and last part with just a couple of minutes, just to touch on it really, which is, would it matter? In other words, what status? If Crete said something positive, historically important about ecumenism, as Father Heers and Archbishop Job believe, would it matter? Is it really any different from a statement of a hierarch? Is it any different from the Orthodox signatories to a joint theological commission's agreed statement? Is it different from, with all due respect, the Irenaeus document, which may be wonderful, but what sort of authority does that? So my question is not the quality of the statements, but the status and the authority. To what degree are they binding? Well, that, of course, opens up the question of whether Crete was a genuinely Orthodox council. And I will not answer that in the 90 seconds that I have left, but we may just touch on one or two quick points, which is, one, we know, and we hear almost ad nauseum, that the fact that a council occurs does not guarantee its own authenticity. Okay? So you can't say, well, the council happened, and even if all 14 had come, that then it is absolutely a binding council. We know of many instances in the history of the church when formally and self-believing even ecumenical councils, and this did not present itself as such, did not stick. But the second point would be that neither does the fact that 4 of the 14 did not appear mean that it's not an authentic council, because, and we hear people mention the Council of Ephesus and other examples where representation was spotty, and yet the council did stick. A third and fourth point combined relates to the fact that, in the periods, and I'm not suggesting that Crete should be viewed as an ecumenical council, but just to take them by analogy, in the periods following Nicaea and following Chalcedon, if one lived then, there would have been, I believe, as much confusion about what that council was that would sociologically not have been able to be, sort of added up, as we have now about this council. In other words, you have people on different sides saying it's this, others saying it's that, and it's not resolved until the next council, really, in each case. Finally, with the question with which I began, if Crete did not settle this, I think we might ask ourselves, must some council at some point settle this question? Or can it remain forever a subject of debate? We've often viewed dialogue, an ongoing dialogue, as always fruitful in every context. And while there are many, many, many levels on which that is true, if we look back at the history of the church and think there had never been decisive moments in which ongoing debated questions were settled, we'd be in quite a muddle. So I'll leave it there.